Welcome to Forthright, and this is Sulani Madsen. I'm here with Darin Watkins as a guest today. It is a reader feedback, but a little bit different because I'm going to read this column, and then Darin and I are going to have a conversation about Washington redistricting and the political shuffle. This was published in September 29th, 2021. Time for the big dance. Not the NCAA March Madness version, but the once-a-decade post-census political shuffle. The 4 members of the Washington State Redistricting Commission have issued their first maps with proposed boundary changes for both legislative and congressional districts. And in eastern Washington, there's at least one textbook example of gerrymandering. A glance at a map makes it clear Lincoln County is in play again. We are small enough to be useful in balancing population and geographically located in or contiguous with multiple legislative districts. And we are a deep red political prize, even in Washington's bipartisan and theoretically apolitical redistricting process. 3 of Washington's 10 congressional districts are all or almost all east of the Cascades. Testimony at a redistricting commission hearing earlier this year advocated for flipping the 4th and 5th congressional districts horizontal instead of vertical. At the time, I wrote it was worth considering early in the process. I've changed my mind. 3 of the 4 commissioner maps leave the 4th and 5th congressional districts running vertically from the Oregon border to Canada, similar to their current territory. Representative Dan Newhouse currently represents the 4th congressional district, and Representative Kathy McMorris Rogers represents us in the 5th. Both are Republicans. Brady Pinheiro Walkinshaw, a Senate Democratic Caucus appointee, lopped Northeast Washington and Lincoln County out of the 5th district and attached them to the 4th congressional district. While it makes for a more physically compact 5th district, including both Spokane and the eastern portion of the Tri-Cities, it leaves the representative of the 4th congressional district covering a territory from near Hood River to Medellin Falls. The charts on the Commission's website at redistrictingwa.gov, which carefully lay out the ethnic demographics of each proposed district, also need a column for land area and maximum drive time. Presumably, Walkinshaw knows his proposal is unpalatable, albeit potentially making the 5th congressional district a little bit more politically competitive. It might be a bargaining chip for political negotiations, but it would clearly put constituents of the 4th congressional district at a disadvantage compared to the other 9 Washington districts. Hard pass. Just as in 2011, Lincoln County is at the crossroads of 5 legislative districts. Lincoln County was in the 7th legislative district, along with Ponderay, Stevens, Ferry, and parts of Spokane and Okanagan counties for over 30 years, until being moved to the 13th district at the last redistricting dance. April Sims, House Democratic Caucus appointee, would return Lincoln County to the 7th. Sims' map is pretty straightforward for eastern Washington, except for the jelly donut down around Yakima. In attempting to respond to the Yakima Nation's request to be in a single district, her map displays a grape jelly purple 15th district surrounded by the 14th. That may need a little work. Heads up to the residents of South Central Washington. Time to get involved. When Lincoln County was combined with most of Grant County, all of Kittitas County, and a little sliver of Yakima County into the 13th district in 2011, it didn't seem to be a matter of gerrymandering as much as working from the borders to the middle, and we were all left over. It's been a good combination. The counties share similar concerns over water, issues surrounding large-scale commercial agriculture, and political culture. And even the travel distance between the Spokane County line and Snoqualmie Pass is manageable with freeway access. But the 13th legislative district, as proposed by Paul Graves, House Republican Caucus appointee, fails to provide any of that common ground. It divides Grant County between the 9th, 12th, and 13th districts. It retains Lincoln County in the 13th, connected with a narrow isthmus along the I-90 corridor to the western 2/3 of the district, and it adds a chunk of eastern King County with the boundary going nearly to Issaquah. A legislative district stretching from Spokane's West Plains to Issaquah is more than a bridge too far. Lincoln County's red votes might offset King County blue votes, but it would be totally unmanageable for any legislator to effectively address such a gerrymandered district. Walkinshaw puts Lincoln County in the 12th legislative district and breaks up the existing 9th legislative district in southeast Washington, bumping incumbent Representative Mary Dye, Republican of Pomeroy, out of her seat. While Walkinshaw's proposed districts are geographically cohesive, they appear to be politically motivated. In the statement of intent for his legislative district map, Joe Fain, a Senate Republican Caucus appointee, put a priority on keeping school districts together and says his, quote, proposal reflects the interest of each tribal governments that communicated with the commission, end quote. Lincoln County lands in the 6th legislative district with the rest of the West Plains. And that's not a bad fit. Over 60% of employed adults in Lincoln County commute to work in Spokane County, and we're feeling the same development pressures and opportunities. Now the negotiations start. May the best map win. Well, following that column, I've been having some more conversations with people about the negotiations that are going on, and I realize Washington State has a bipartisan commission, 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats. They have to not be serving in the legislature, and they meet with a non-voting chair. 3 of the 4 have to agree on the final map, or it goes into a whole other process. But let's assume that the 3 of the 4 do agree. So Darin, you had some comments that you and I have talked about these maps. What would you like to add?
Well, this is probably, on the front side, one of the most boring comments and commentaries you can get, because it's about redistricting, and it doesn't really seem, when people get excited though is after it's all said and done.
Yeah.
When all of a sudden they realize their county commissioner or their state representative no longer is their county commissioner or state representative. That's usually what this happens. And I think that people are very surprised to find out that at the end of the day, this is more about politics than it actually is about how to best serve voters in the districts.
Right. When you look at the geography, it seems like it should be fairly simple to just divide it up, but it gets particularly complicated, even just starting with the geography. I talked with Representative Alex Ibarra. He's currently my representative in the 13th legislative district, lives in Quincy, and he honestly has been a rocket scientist, and he's a mathematician and statistician, and he got totally drawn into the whole thing. One of the reasons for that 13th legislative district that I call gerrymandered, that goes over the Snoqualmie Pass, Paul Graves is addressing one of the problems, which is there are, according to Alex, 48,576 voters that are currently west of the Cascade Crest that have to join a legislative district on the east. Well, that's just the numbers. You take the number of people in the state, you divide them by 39 districts, and that's what you get. And then as Alex went on to look at it, geographically, there's only 3 places that you can cross the pass mostly reliably or in the winter across east to west. And one is down in Clark County along the Columbia, Stevens Pass, and Snoqualmie Pass. So you only have a limited number of places.
Right.
But then there's the politics that goes behind it once you've got the numbers divvied up.
Right. And it's important to know that this is an exercise that happens only once every 10 years because it's based on the census numbers. Now, what made everything goofy this year is because the census was delayed, or in fact, in many cases, incomplete because of COVID. So, but the work still has to be done. There are still deadlines that have to be met. So they're doing their best, but in many cases, they haven't even seen the numbers or how big a district has to grow or shrink until just the last couple of weeks.
Right. It's pretty recent. And the last time this happened in 2011, the deadline for having the map done was the end of the year. They actually found someone who interpreted the words to mean they could actually go to January 1st. So the map was adopted January 1st. Because that really messed up everybody's holidays, the legislature changed it. So the deadline now is mid-November. So they had less time on the front end and less time on the back end to come up with a map. This is all going to happen really, really fast.
And it's broad sweeping. It's not just your congressional representatives. It is also your state representative. Now it's your county commissioner, because we're dividing into 5 districts in Spokane. And it's also your city. The city guidelines will get changed. And so right now it looks like that they're going to have to somehow add more people into what's considered the first, which is the Hilliard area. So where will they redraw that line? Traditionally, we've been pretty straight up and down. It's Division Street, and for the most part, and it's changed. It was Spokane Falls Boulevard, but now and then we just divided the city into 3 pieces, and it was done that way for a number of years. But now, because of population changes, those boundaries are going to have to get divided up a little bit. So it'll be interesting to see how it turns out.
And one of the things I heard at that first redistricting hearing for public input in Eastern Washington was several people who were complaining that the lines were drawn down the middle of streets so that neighbors across the street from each other were in different districts instead of following, it made more sense to this person, instead of following, say, power line right-of-ways or things that divided neighborhoods more distinctly. But one of the things that Alex Ibarra had told me is that, if you look at the redistricting.wa.gov maps, there is a place where you can draw your own map for the state and the congressional districts, but you're limited to precincts and to using the precinct lines as your boundaries.
Right.
And precinct boundary lines, if anybody ever looks at those, they make very little sense.
So why is that important? So, for example, there has been a long-standing process where the folks that want to make, say, for example, whatever party that you're in, want to make a bigger picture, right? They want to be able to carve out a district that always votes that way. And that's the word for that is gerrymandering, right? And what that happens is the map drawers will say, well, I'll let this will be the district here because all of my voters are in this district. So we'll make this a green district, whatever the vote is, right? Well, where it gets interesting now is this gamesmanship, right? Do you just make a district with all your voters in one place, or do you maybe split that up a little bit so that your voters are in maybe two different districts, and so therefore you have this chance of voting? Because in Spokane traditionally has a very blue center, which is the third legislative district, and then the rest of the districts kind of get reshaped and formed all the time. Like the sixth is kind of a horseshoe that sort of goes around the outside of everything.
It's a little less of a horseshoe than it was before 2011.
Sure,
so
but it's still there.
It's still there.
And then the ninth used to come all the way up, and the ninth was about higher education. It used to be Cheney and Pullman and all of that, and even go up into the South Hill. Well, that's all been pulled back, and so it's just a matter of it's important for people to speak out during this part of the process. The first thing is to maintain the votes and the places that they have, or is to pay attention to what the politics are saying. The reason why gerrymandering has become an interesting conversation of late is that it used to always protect a district, right? So let's just say it is a Democrat district, just for conversation. Well, what happens, we saw it first with the Republican Party, where you had very fringe elements of the Tea Party, for example. Well, in the primary, because that's just a vote to see about party in some states, you had main candidates getting knocked out of the primary race. And same now you're seeing now with left candidates. You're seeing very progressive lefts that are knocking out candidates, the long term. And so that's been a challenge. In Washington State, though, we actually have a pretty good system. It's always top two. It's not by party. It's the top two candidates. And on top of that, the system that we have, which is sort of unique, which is you have two Democrats and two Republicans, and three of them have to agree on the final
on the
map.
Redistricting Commission.
Yeah, on the maps, on the redistricting. So, it's in design, but watching some of the testimony has been interesting. So, for example, in drawing the county maps recently, the latest one, because we have to go to 5 county commissioners, right? That's the new law. And so you would think that it would just be 5 pie shapes, right? Seems like on the outside a good idea, because then you've got some urban and some suburban, rural.
A cross section, diversity, right?
A nice cross section, but that doesn't tend to work for voters. So the latest maps have one big circle cut out of the middle, which would be essentially the traditional 3rd legislative district, long-term, held by Democrats. So one of the members of the commission, though, was saying, no, we should divide that up, and we should do it. Spokane has been traditionally east and west, and he wants to drive it down the middle. And the challenge with that is, I've lived in Spokane my whole life. It's always been really about the river, right?
It's the river.
It's north and it's south. So
since the founding of the town, it's been north and south.
Right. So you have traditional geographic boundaries. You have traditional mindsets for individuals running against what might be in the best interest of a political party.
Yeah, and that's where the challenge of having legislative districts that lap over the Cascades comes in, because, so the one map takes all of those voters that have to come from west to east and puts them into the 13th legislative district, which means the 13th has to shed voters elsewhere, which is why it ends up with that weird shape.
Right.
The other way of doing it, the other 2 districts that do have passes across or ways through the mountains, are the 14th and the 14th and the 12th. And the 14th and the 12th, one of the proposals, and this is one that Alex was playing with, that others are playing with, is looking at, well, what if you take that what's that round number now, 46,000 people who have to cross the mountains, and you split it into 3 parts, 48,000 people, so that each of those 3 border crossing, mountain crossing districts has to pick up about 12,000. Well, it does some interesting things when you start looking at it, because the voters that it would pick up down along the river, it picks up some red votes, some Republican votes coming into a Republican district on the east side, which is, fine. It's another safe seat, but it starts to imperil some districts in southwest Washington, who then lose those red votes.
Right.
And then if you put there's kind of the same thing going on. If you put some into the 12th is becoming a little more purple. So do you,
right.
It's like, it's a really interesting conversation. None of it happens. They will skirt past it. You will hear terms coming out of the commission that says, well, we've made more competitive districts, or we've made more safe districts. That's about as close as you're going to get to hearing the politics discussed.
To saying even. And the challenge becomes, too, is that realistically, most people just don't get involved with it.
No.
Yeah, I mean, the irony of all is, do you know what percentage of people in our legislative district or our congressional district can name who our congressional representative is? What percentage do you think that is?
Oh, do you have an answer?
It's about 1 in 5.
Yeah, I'm afraid that's
It's
about
Kathy
20%.
McMorris Rogers, and she has been our congresswoman now for she's going into her 9th term.
Yeah, since 2004.
So, and yet, it's just how many, I don't know that people are concerned about policies, and people are concerned about impacts to their life, but they don't necessarily really look into who's behind those policies, or
Right.
how are those votes happening, and how can and it's typically what happens, you'll have an issue that gets a lot of attention, and you'll get community leaders that step forward and say, you know what, we need to fix this. And that's typically when you'll start seeing more re-engagement with those political conversations.
Yeah. Where I first noticed who my representative was, and it was Kathy McMorris in the state legislature, was because as a member of the American Institute of Architects, I was apparently one of only very few architects who lived in the 7th legislative district. And there was a reason, she wasn't in there yet, but there was a reason that there was something that the AIA wanted to connect with the legislators in that legislative district. So an organization that I belong to contacted me as a constituent to ask me to go talk to my legislators, and it was about school construction issues, and have that conversation and connect. Otherwise, I didn't know until then, and I'd been voting for 10 or more years at that point. So until it does affect you directly, you maybe don't pay attention.
And who it does affect? It's those people who are currently the elected officials in those districts. Mm-hmm. Because sometimes this is done almost as a way of either enhancing or punishing, which is mm-hmm. kind of what you see like right now. So Representative Maycomer up mm-hmm. in the 7th has become very popular. She's very well spoken. She's mm-hmm. very down to earth, and she served as the minority floor leader in the mm-hmm. last session. So she was constantly on the floor in fact, some of the debates between her and Marcus Riccelli were honestly legendary. They were really well thought out, solid debates. And I mean, they were, for political wonks like us, I mean, we were just engaged.
I respect both of them for their
moment, right?
I respect both of them for their intelligence.
But all of a sudden, her district has some real strange configurations depending on the maps you see, and so you just wonder where all of that will shake out for her.
Yeah. Well, there is an opportunity for people to get involved. There's still some time to have public comment, both on the county map. I think you only got about another week or so.
Correct.
Just about one more week on the Spokane County redistricting to get your input in there. And on the legislative and congressional maps, I think it runs till November 5th.
A few more weeks, yeah.
A few more weeks, but still, now is the time to say something.
And even if it's just as simple as to say, look, I don't want to change. Or if it's as simple to say that, I think that I would be better served as part of this district. Even those things would be great, because the commission doesn't get a lot of guidance, and they do read those comments. So those are very important to get in.
And they will. I do believe the commission members they want to do a good job. But if you think about it, there isn't one of them that is really familiar with the entire state. right? Like, we're just talking mostly about Eastern Washington. I wouldn't even begin to talk about the districts on the west side. I don't know the communities well enough. But for these commissioners, there's a lack of familiarity with the east side as well. So this is an opportunity to get your 2 bits worth in, and it may be helpful. If you're really into the math and into the mapping, you can dig into that mapping software. You can draw your own district. You will be restricted to looking at layers that have county lines, city boundaries, and precincts. You can't go any smaller than a precinct boundary. And again, if you look at the precincts in different counties, you'll notice that they're very different sizes. They are not matched in population. There may have been a rhyme or reason to them when they were first drawn in 1890, but they haven't changed since. But that's as far as you can go. The commissioners actually have more layers. So, like, Joe Fain said he was looking at school district boundaries. He's got more GIS layers. He's got that one.
Right. School districts. Yeah.
School districts being a kind of community boundary that makes sense to people. Most people, if they have kids at all, they know what school district they're in, or they pay attention to their taxes. So, you're a little bit limited. You don't have quite as much flexibility as the commissioners do, because they can split precincts. But you can look at where you are, what precinct you're in, how it's being treated. Are you kind of in the middle, and so you're not like on a boundary condition? But if you're in any kind of a boundary condition, you may want to speak up and say which direction makes more sense for your area, and tell them why, because they have specific guidelines that they need to try to respect. They are trying to keep communities of interest together, so tell them why. Yeah. So this is a plea to please wake up and pay attention, because you don't get to complain about it again for the next 10 years.
Right, exactly. Speak your piece now or wait another decade.
Right. Speak now or wait until 2031. Thanks for coming in for a conversation.
My pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.